As our journey through the Bible continues, we now come to the beginning of the Davidic kingdom, the kingdom of Israel. And we've covered a huge amount of ground to get here time-wise, starting back with Abraham. That was back in 2000 BC. And so they have gone into Egypt and come out of Egypt and gone through the generation that was in the wilderness. That's got us to the middle part of the millennia, and now we're around 1000 BC. It's hard to pin down dates exactly, but we're at really 1000 BC-ish is what we're thinking. And we pick up with the life of David. And if you had asked me before this week to pick like the essential moment, if you had to pick one turning point moment in the life of David to focus on, I don't think I would have picked this, but I would after this week. I think having spent time right here, I appreciate the wisdom of the people who laid this out, this narrative lectionary, this going through the Bible in a year. Like they did a great job of finding these key turning points in Scripture. So I think everything that has happened in David's life led to this moment, and then everything that follows sort of unfolds from it. Like I think this is kind of a linchpin. And what we're going to look at is this moment when David first begins to rule over the 12 tribes, and then one of his first major decisions that sets the way that he will rule going forward. So first, how does David become king? David, when we pick up with David today, sort of early middle age, in his 30s, he could have declared himself king. At this point, he could have easily declared himself king. He had public acclaim going all the way back to when he had defeated Goliath and become a leader in the first king Saul and Saul's military, such that he had built up this public reputation. Saul has killed his thousands, David has killed his 10,000s was the refrain, the rhyme. I'm sure it's far catchier in Hebrew. And so people knew him. He had been married, he was married to Saul's daughter, Michal. And so when he had legitimacy through that. And so he had run from Saul when Saul had turned against him, and he had gathered his own band of warriors. And so he had his own militia. And in a time when having a standing army was not common, that was not what usually done, for him to have a militia was pretty impressive. The southern part of the 12 tribes, the southern couple tribes, had already committed themselves to following his lead, his rule. And so when we pick up here, when David is in his about 30 or so, like he could have, at this point, said, I have the military power, I have the public acclaim, I already have multiple tribes following me. He could have turned to the rest of the tribes and say, now it's your turn, you're going to follow me whether you like it or not. And he doesn't. He waits. He waits 7 years. He waits 7 years, doesn't force it. He was patient. He understood that it'd be far better if all of the tribes turned to him voluntarily. And then after 7 years, that's what happens. The leaders of the 12 tribes come to him, and collectively they make this offer. The tribes that have already committed to follow David, as well as the tribes that had not. They make this offer. They say, we, the leaders of the 12 tribes, see you as one of us, flesh of our flesh, bone of our bone. They recognize that David has been the one who's been effectively protecting the tribes over multiple years. So now they are ready to trust him. They've seen his character. They have this offer to make. So they make this offer. You shall be shepherd of my people Israel, and you shall be prince over Israel. It's a very interesting offer. It's not flat out saying, you want to be king? There's a caveat there, and it's, you shall be shepherd of the people. You shall rule. You shall be prince. You shall prince. It's kind of, the translation of that verb is kind of odd. It's you shall prince or you shall rule. So first, the word shepherd, you gotta look at that. This is a not very subtle nod to what they want him to be. They want him to be a shepherd. A shepherd is someone who is hired to care for another person's flock. So by saying we want you to be shepherd, is to say we want you, David, to understand that you are here to care for another person's flock, God's people. You are here we're not here to be your people. We're here as God's people, and we're inviting you to be the shepherd over us, recognizing that we are God's people. And then, he's invited to shepherd them, to prince over them, to rule over them. And it's not so much that word is hard to translate just for various reasons, but what's interesting and important is not that word is chosen, it's what word is not chosen. They don't say to him, we want you to be a shepherd, be like a shepherd, yes, David, be king. They don't say the word king, because they just had a king. His name was Saul, and it didn't go very well. Like, for them to say, we want you to rule over us, we don't want you to be king, is kind of nodding to the fact that Saul was king, and it did not work out, right? And so David, he doesn't get caught up in himself and saying, you got to offer me the title or else I'm not going to take this. He agrees. He agrees that he will be a shepherd of God's people, not his people, God's people, and he will do it to rule, not taking on all of the practices that Saul had taken on as king. So David's reign begins with a clear sense of what his task is: serve the good of God's people. That's the first part of what we look at today. The second part is this first major decision he makes. So the first important decisions he makes is he's going to bring the ark to Jerusalem. It's one of those things where, because we know it happened, we have a sense that, well, of course it would have happened. This sort of like inevitability of history. Of course that was going to be what happened, right? Because we know how various parts of history turned out, it's very easy to think, that's how it must have. That was always going to turn out that way. No, that wasn't necessarily always going to be the case. Like, this is a major decision for David to make, and he didn't have to make it. He could have left the ark, the container for the 10 Commandments, the container that has the stone tablets brought down from the mountain by Moses. He could have left those 30 miles away in Shiloh. And that's where they had been for a while. They had just sort of faded out from the story of the Jewish people for a while at this point. Like, they just hadn't been active. If you read through Scripture, there's a point in that time of Joshua and Judges, it's like, where did the ark go? Oh, well, they just kind of pushed it in the closet aside, and they just kind of lost track of it. And David could have left it just pushed aside up in Shiloh, 30 miles away. 30 miles is a long way when you got to go by foot, right? And they could have just ignored it. In fact, you could argue that David made his life far harder in bringing the ark into Jerusalem. For let's look at what the situation was for David. The 12 tribes have agreed to follow him, but they haven't said, we want you to be king. They've said, we want you to rule. We want you to sort of prince over us, is the literal term. And so that he doesn't have this, he has the support of the people, but it may be a touch tenuous. And he has built a new capital. Well, he's building a new capital, rebuilding Jerusalem after he conquered it. But this is a new politics. This is a new government. This is a new way of these people being together. This is the first time this has happened. And so he really needs the people to believe that he's in charge. And so for the most important thing he needs right then, at that moment, is the thing that any government needs. He needs legitimacy. He needs people to believe that he really is in charge. Because the only difference between a leader and a dude taking a walk is, did people follow? Right? If people aren't going to follow David, then he's not king. He's just a dude taking a walk. And it's that sense of legitimacy. Oh, that's the leader. That's the ruler. That's King David, right? Because David's taking a walk, we should follow him, right? He needs to build up this sense of legitimacy and the sense of, like, this is how things work. And so if that's what he needs more than anything else, and he needs it in a time when there's no IRS, there's no police force, there's no standing army to sort of enforce it, it's either going to happen or it's not. Right? When he needs this to happen, it seems odd, or maybe not quite the obvious move, for David to go and get the reminder of the last government, so to speak. Right? Because the government of the Hebrew people coming through the wilderness was, here's the ark, Moses is teaching it, do what Moses says. That was their government, right? And they get to the promised land, and then things sort of go cattywampus with the time of the judges, and that sort of, that's coming to an end now, as they're coming out of the time of the judges. But as they're trying to figure out how to have a real government, for David to go grab the most visible, powerful sign of the previous government is pretty gutsy. Right? Imagination fails me to even come up with a comparison. Right? Like the best I could come up with is like going on a first date and bringing your parents with you. Like going on a first date and you're trying to start a new relationship while having people with you that have known you since the day you were born, right? That would be a bit challenging and frankly feel really weird to go on a date and bring your parents. Like that's like that is kind of the feel of this. He is starting the new kingdom and he's bringing the biggest sign of the previous one. If David had wanted to become a king in this usual consolidated sense of power, making it clear that he was in charge, this was really a bad move. If that was his goal, he should have ignored the ark, left it alone, and pretended it didn't exist. That's not what he does. David brings the ark to Jerusalem. He brings the physical reminder of the Torah, God's requests about how to live. Practically, the Torah, the Ten Commandments, are the major restraints on what David can do as the one who's ruling, right? Instead of running from these, he brings them closer, and as the tablets ride in on the ark, as the tablets are going into Jerusalem in the ark, right? He leads the way. He leads the way, and he doesn't lead the way in his greatest finery as king. He doesn't lead the way all dressed up in his grand majesty. He leads the way in a simple ephod, like t-shirt and jeans effectively, right? And he dances in front of the procession. He dances in front of the ark, making it clear that he is not sort of like the king and the Torah, like equal parts in this procession. He is putting himself beneath the grandeur of the ark, and here is David, as simple as he can be, leading the dance. He is putting himself beneath the authority of the ark. We read, it's in 2 Samuel 6, David danced before the Lord with all of his might, and David was girded with a linen ephod, t-shirt and jeans. So David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with the shouting and the sound of the horn. It's a parade. It's an exciting parade, right? As the ark of the Lord came into the city of David, Michal, the daughter of Saul, this would be David's wife, which gives him legitimacy to claim to be able to rule, looked out of the window and saw King David leaping and dancing, and she despised him. This is a fascinating moment, right? David is establishing what will be the nature of his rule. And Michal, the daughter of the previous king, looks down on him and despises him. Why does she despise him? My best guess is that she is her father's daughter. And her father had ruled as, I'm in charge, there's no greater power than me, I'm in charge. And so she had this sense of decorum, this sense of power, this sense of this is how authority should work. And David was not following it. David was doing something that her dad would have never done. So she despised him for it. And David says, this is how I'm going to do things, right? It was right. Right? It was right that no one tries to outglory the ark. No one tries to outfinery the ark. In looking at this moment, how David handles becoming ruler, and this move he makes to bring the ark to Jerusalem, I believe I'm understanding something for the first time. For years, I've heard that phrase that David was a man after God's own heart. David, the man after God's own heart. Like, that's the refrain around David. King David, the man after God's own heart. That was what was said of him in 1 Samuel 13 is where that phrase shows up. When Samuel, the prophet Samuel, is declaring to the previous king, Saul, that God is not going to back your play anymore, Saul. God is going to find a man after God's own heart. And it turns out to be David. So what makes David a man after God's own heart? It's not that he's perfect. If you want the list of all the things that just go completely off the rails, you can start with Bathsheba, but there's plenty to go from there. He messes up with the census. He plays favorites among his kids to disastrous results. He wallows in grief after one of his kids is killed, that's part of the whole disastrous results thing. He leaves his successor, Solomon, explicit directions on who to kill, who's going to be a troublemaker for him. There are some real... David's kind of a wingnut at times. What made him a man after God's own heart is not that he was perfect, because he wasn't. It's that from the start, he began his rule by submitting himself to God's requests about how to live. He didn't always get it right, but when he was confronted about it, he didn't say, well, God can't tell me what to do. I'm a king. He ate his crow. He acknowledged his failures, his sin, right? He understood that any power he had was always meant to be used like a shepherd for the good of those for whom his power impacted. He further understood that his power was always under a greater power, who could very legitimately request that he act and live in a certain way. He was not a king over Israel, and that was that. He was king under Torah. And that's such a profound difference. That's what was essential to David. What made him a man after God's own heart, what's really helpful to me is understanding this sense of David understood himself to be under God's authority, and he submitted himself to that. And I think that is profoundly healthy in a time, especially today, when we are so very focused on individual rights and individual everything, to understand that I am under God's authority primarily and first. And everything else will get worked out. All right. If that's what made David a man after God's own heart, then I have some hopes that maybe I can be too. Because if I looked at David's descendant, Jesus, what did Jesus get right? Everything. Great. Jesus can be intimidating. If I look at David and say, well, if David can be a man after God's own heart and he was complete screw up at times, maybe I have some hope there. All right, we can be like him, and in doing so, be people of God's own heart. I have to say that there's a fellow, there's a quote, a fellow who has probably helped me understand this more than anyone. There's a guy named Thomas à Kempis, who in the Middle Ages wrote a book called The Imitation of Christ, a book written to prepare people who are going into monastic orders. And this, inspired by David's descendant, this is what he writes of people. The only person who can safely appear in public is one who wishes he were at home. He alone can safely speak who prefers to be silent. Only he can safely govern who prefers to live in submission. And only he can safely command who prefers to obey. I think that's David. I think that's the great encapsulation what it means to be a person after God's own heart. To understand that we always live as people under the guidance of the Torah. And that's what makes us God's people. Thanks be to God. Amen.